today stepped in and sent out a slew of directions to ensure that migrant workers reach home within 15 days. So state governments, central governments, local administrations have now been given 15 days to identify and ensure migrant workers reach home. It's a sharp deadline. In fact, if Shramik trains or special trains are required, the Ministry of Railways have to provide them within 24 hours. All of the schemes which have been put in place for migrant workers have to be addressed to them, have to be publicized and popularized. And importantly, the Supreme Court has also asked for those who have reached their homes to be skill assessed. Now, this slew of directions, of course, comes months after migrant workers have started walking home. And in the court itself, the government has revealed that about 41 lakh migrant workers have already been moved. The question is, what comes next? Where do these migrant workers now find jobs? What happens to the lack of labor back in the cities from where they moved? How does this change the demographics? To speak more on this, I'm joined today by Yogendra Yadav, founder of Swaraj India. Mr. Yadav, welcome to the show. Great to have you on. And let's just start with the basic question of what here from now?
I read the Supreme Court's order, a 39-page order, very carefully, and I'm afraid this isn't a very helpful order because, in a sense, the order comes rather too late. I'm sure the judges are very well-meaning. I'm sure they want to see something nice happening in the country. But we cannot forget the fact that all this was brought to Supreme Court's attention in the end of March when the whole thing began. Court happily believed an affidavit that turned out to be a completely false affidavit. And even in today's judgment, court has not made a single comment on that affidavit, which said not a single person is on these roads. Much of the migration began in the month of April. The matter was again brought to Supreme Court. The court decided to do nothing. It is only in the month of May, when actually the flood began, that the government allowed trains to be run. And let us not forget, even as late as 15th of May, the Supreme Court refused to intervene. And then suddenly, towards the end of May, Supreme Court suo moto takes cognizance of it. I'm afraid this will be written as one of the rather sorry chapters in the history of the Indian Supreme Court. The directions given 2 weeks ago were useful because some of the trains needed to be run. They have run. And as the court notes in today's orders, much of that transportation has already taken place. So any fresh orders today, these are good orders, but I don't know how useful they are because much of the good or much of the damage has already taken place. So those who wanted to go have somehow managed to reach. The real question now is what next? The only benefit that I can see coming from Supreme Court's order today is that towards the end of the order, they have said any FIR registered against any of these people should not be, they have requested the states not to pursue those, which is a sensible thing, which is what the courts can do. And I hope this would at least stop criminalizing those workers. The real question, as you say, is what next? What next is a huge economic challenge. We have, by going by today's court affidavits and so on and so forth, we have anywhere between 1 to 2 crore people who have gone back to their native places. These native places do not offer much employment. That's why they went away in the first place. And it would require a huge policy initiative for the government to do something about it. To be absolutely frank, I really do not know what the Supreme Court can do about it. This is an economic policy challenge. Not much has happened. If the court wanted...
absolutely, Mr. Yadav, it's not about... So the Supreme Court's order is just the starting point of this conversation because we know that migrant workers have been in distress. My question is about what comes next. There is a survey today which talks about a shortage of about 40 to 50% on an average in various industries. back in places from where perhaps the migrant workers have moved. On the other hand, you have many state governments saying that we will give them work here. The state governments from where the migrant workers have moved have said, now this is an opportunity for our locals to come in and take all of these jobs. But all of this is easier said than done. How do you see the situation unfolding?
Absolutely. Much of this is easier said than done. When places like Uttar Pradesh or Bihar say we will find jobs for them, I mean, I don't even take those kind of statements seriously. These governments have done very, very little for their workers in the past. I don't see how, or Madhya Pradesh for that matter, or Chhattisgarh for that matter, I don't know how they are going to generate jobs for them. The one thing that they could have said, which even the Supreme Court could have done something about, was to provide a temporary relief by expanding Manrega. Manrega says that the minimum guaranteed number of days per job card are 100. That's for one household. The Supreme Court could have said, please ensure that they reach at least 100, because as you know, the total number of days actually provided are around 45 or so. Or the court could have said, lift the ceiling of 100, make it 150, 200. That did not happen. That's an immediate kind of relief the governments can provide. But the real issue is, how do we handle? So we have problems at both ends. In the villages, you have these crores of people who have landed up without any job opportunities now. And in some of these urban areas, you have factories waiting for workers to arrive. To my mind, some of this demand-supply matching will take place, as we have read and heard. Some of these industries, even some of the farmers, are sending buses to Bihar to bring back the labor. Those kind of things would happen. But that's minor. That's a very small-scale thing. What is required is nothing short of a national attempt to, number one, regenerate rural economy. Rural areas have to produce more jobs. Manrega can only be a very short-term measure to alleviate the suffering for a very short time. I personally think that we should not see this merely as a disaster or a problem. We should also see this as an opportunity to regenerate rural India. A large number of industries that work, say in Surat, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, Delhi, or all kinds of places, I really see no reason why National Capital Territory region of Delhi should be a region for factories. There's nothing special about Delhi which requires factories to be located in Delhi. Why can't half of these things actually be located in rural areas, which now have roads, which now have transport facilities, have internet and electricity? So some kind of a push for rural industrialization would be just the right moment in our history, which can be taken up. On the other hand, in the case of urban areas and factories which require workers, I'm not too sure that this would happen at a very large scale as of now, because the real problem, as everyone keeps saying, is not so much the supply bottleneck. We have a demand bottleneck. Some of the factories do require labor to come in right away, but the problem is in most cases, they do not have demand. And unless something big is done to push demand, which is what the economists have been arguing, pleading with the government, unless that kind of a thing happens, how do we see a full throttle beginning of industry? So labor is only one part of the problem. The real problem is lack of demand.
Lack of demand by and by, but immediately there are a lot of sectors which will need to start finding labor. Will that lead to a boost in wages is something we'll have to wait and see how this situation unfolds. It's much more complex and much more deeper than any one facet once you get into it. Thank you so much, Yogendra Yadav, for joining us today with your perspective on this. Up ahead, we will be looking at a very interesting interview done on ET Now today, where we spoke with ace investor Guy Spryer.
I've been an optimist throughout this crisis, and it's not been to my benefit. I've consistently underestimated the impact of COVID-19 on the global economy. And as I was saying to you and I've said to others, I think that I was right in assessing the impact of the virus as being way less than people expected. But what I didn't understand was the extraordinary panic that effectively set in amongst policymakers to take some really outrageous actions which have damaged economies around the world. And But I'm still an optimist in that when I read articles that say that business travel will never come back, or it'll take 3 years for business travel to come back, I don't think the minute the heavy hand of the governments that are trying to show that they're doing something are lifted, I think the vast majority of human behaviors will go back to the way they were before. How long does that take? You know, we know, I'm not saying anything you don't know, so forgive me for repeating what you do know. We know that a vaccine is going to come sooner or later. And I think that increasingly, even without a vaccine, as we allow people freedom to decide their own lives, older people will take the precautions that they need. Younger people will decide how much risk they want to take. Different businesses will decide how to configure themselves for, you know, just to give you a sense, this Saturday night, coming tomorrow night here in Switzerland, the cinemas are opening again. I don't think we've booked yet, but I think that I and my family will be in the cinemas. And we expect that the cinemas will take some precautions. And based on my reading, I feel quite confident that if I'm not in a bar, I'm not in a place where people are breathing heavily right next to me, I think there's no issues at all. So even without a vaccine, I think that people will realize, hey, I have to live my life. And so things will come back to normal way faster than most of the doomsdayers are expecting. I don't know if that was a helpful answer.
All your answers are helpful, Guy, please. No, you know, just before we started, and also as you were speaking just now, you've talked about how the impact of this could be seen for a long time to come. And you know, at the same time, we're seeing markets go to, you know, record after record. So as a value investor, the question I have is, have I missed the boat?
Well, I went into this pretty fully invested, and it was shocking to me to see Warren Buffett so bearish at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting. And I decided that I had to find things in my portfolio to sell, such that, you know, it's still not an enormous amount of cash, but I think I'm at about 15% cash right now. I think that a big part of the bearishness of some of these old school value investors like Warren Buffett and Sam Zell and Howard Marks is that they've kind of built their careers on financial prudence and the expectation that from time to time the markets will go haywire and they'll get the opportunity to buy. And while they don't want to wish any bad economic outcomes on people, they kind of thrive when things get dislocated. Except in this crisis, what happened was that the Federal Reserve of the United States and other central banks stepped in and made unlimited money available. And so they were kind of shut out. And, you know, it sticks with me every time Warren Buffett saying, look, they had to do what they did, but we don't know what the consequences are. And I think that if something were to happen that would take away the willpower of the central banks to keep providing endless liquidity, unlimited, I mean, the governor of the central bank, no, what do you call it? The Chancellor of the Exchequer of the UK, Rishi Sunak, he famously said, whatever it takes to take care of you. And that is way beyond Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan was accused of spiking the punch bowl. And here we have central bankers telling the markets whatever it takes, which is just extraordinary. And the markets are taking them seriously. They're saying, well, yeah, whatever it takes, we think that you're going to inflate these markets perhaps to infinity. Warren and Howard Marks are saying, well, maybe there's something that comes up either in the near term or in the next 2 years that takes away their willpower to do that.
So, Guy, Buffett famously says, interest rates, they act like gravity, and they bring stock prices down. Now, we are in a world where interest rates will remain low for a long period of time. There is a lot of liquidity. There is a compulsion to invest. I'm trying to understand that if you don't invest now, and you'll be stupid to invest in a bond market. Equity perhaps is the only game in the town.
Yeah. The simple answer is what Charlie Munger says is, Nikunj, this isn't supposed to be easy. But you're absolutely right. You've just presented the conundrum. And how do you deal with that conundrum? Do you go to cash and miss out on equity market rises from here? Do you go to bonds? That seems to be a dumb idea. Or do you stay invested in some extraordinarily inflated, what appears to be an extraordinarily inflated stock market? And then even within equities, you have the question, do you invest in the market darlings, which just seem to go from strength to strength? Or do you stay dyed-in-the-wool classic value investor where all that happens is that your stocks continue to go down, Very, very tough time. But I tell you something, Nikunj, I've been doing this now for more than 20 years, and it always feels like the previous years were easy in comparison to the way it is now. And we will look back in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time and say, wow, if only I could have been investing in 2020, it was easy then. So it always looks easy in retrospect, and it's always difficult looking forward. We have tough and treacherous choices to make. I can tell you that one of the conclusions that I came to, I was not. I'm anticipating a question that you probably have, so I'm just going to dive into it because it's also in a lot of people's minds. How can you be a value investor today? And how can you be a value investor when all the businesses that seem to be doing really well are businesses that appear to have very, very high valuations? And, I'll just give you a couple of simple adjustments. So if you're in the enterprise software space, you will have marketing expenditure that you spend to grow the size of your business. But that marketing expenditure goes away the minute you go in steady state. You have to make that adjustment and look at the earnings of the company without the growth capex, if you like, or the growth marketing expenditure. If you make those kinds of adjustments, there are some very smart value investors who come to the conclusion who have in the past or today have come to the conclusion that some of the FANGs are actually great value investments. One of the decisions that I've taken is I can't just be in, I don't own Procter & Gamble, packaged goods companies, but I can't just be invested in those kinds of companies. I have to engage with and understand, Facebook, Google, Twitter, Salesforce, all of those new economy companies, because there are some extraordinary economics that are coming to bear there, and you have to factor that into your valuation model. I actually thought, Nikunj, here's your and my problem, I think. But maybe it's my problem, not yours. That I actually thought when I started doing this 20 years ago and I worshipped at the church of Warren Buffett, is that all I had to do was find newspapers in one newspaper towns. And I thought I could live the rest of my life happily and safely finding newspapers to invest in. And even Warren Buffett had to disabuse himself of that. And, I would really prefer that world, but that's not the world that's been offered to me. But, maybe you can teach an old dog new tricks. Maybe I can become as good an analyst of the Amazons and the Googles and the Spotifys of the world as I can of the newspapers. And it's hard. It's really, really hard to do. But I think that's what is required of people like me.
Where do you see, Guy, a case for low risk, let's say?
Lower risk where?
High uncertainty. Yeah, but where would you see low risk? Across the markets, would there be a region? Would there be a certain theme? Where would you see, even with high uncertainty, low risk?
I mean, the real question is, hey, you can get really low risk in government bonds right now. It just doesn't offer you very much return. So but low risk and the prospect of a higher return. I mean, I would argue that, so this is my perception, but, what is, when there's an event like this, then people focus on the charismatic aspects of the event. So the streets are empty, We're convinced nobody's going to visit a shopping mall again. Nobody's going to visit retail again. So I think that nobody's going to fly again. And I think that all of those places where there's a very, very high perception of risk, nobody's going to, sorry, I'll go on to a couple more. Nobody's going to use a cruise line again, and nobody's going to buy any oil ever again. Because, of course, we all see the oil price go negative a month ago or so. And I think that, things will revert very nicely to where they were before. I've spoken to some very smart people who think that the cruise industry is dead. I don't think that the cruise industry is dead. I think there'll still be people who go on cruises. I think that we're all sick of Zoom. We can't wait to meet people and press the flesh. I don't think that careers will be advanced if people don't press the flesh. I think that we just want to get out of our house and watch a movie in the movie theater. Music and entertainment, I don't think that people are not going to want to go to concerts anymore. So I think all of those areas actually represent some extraordinary opportunities for people who are willing to be a little braver and go out on the curve a little bit, And, it's been a period where to be optimistic has been punishing, unless you're optimistic about the FANGs. If you're optimistic about retail, airlines, business travel, entertainment, all of those things, you've been punished very badly. But sooner or later, it'll become worthwhile to be optimistic about those things again. And exactly when that turning point is, that is a great question. And, I was convinced going into this that this was a 3 or 4 week thing. I didn't think it was going to be longer than that. It's actually turned out to be much longer than that.